we can carry this message to other people. And back on page 45, it said the main object of this book was to enable me to find a power greater than myself, which would solve my problem. Didn't say would help me solve my problem. I found the power, and the power would solve the problem. And that's the way the book is written. Just that way, for us to do those things in that order.
Okay, now let's go to Roman numeral 11, XI. And let's look at this second paragraph for just a moment. A couple of ideas here.
It said, because this book has become the basic text for our society and has helped such large numbers of alcoholic men and women to recovery, there exists a sentiment against any radical changes being made in it. Therefore, the first portion of this volume describing the AA recovery program has been left untouched in the course of revisions made for both the second and the third editions, and now the fourth. The section called The Doctor's Opinion has been kept intact, just as it was originally written in 1939 by the late Dr. William D. Silkworth, our society's great medical benefactor.
Okay, a couple little ideas. Because this book has become the basic text for our society. And when I see the word text, I think I'm alerted to the kind of book that I have in front of me. Now, many of us remember textbooks from school.
Every time I used to be when I was in school, they'd talk about a textbook. For some reason, I'd think about cheating. I don't know why that was.
And many of us didn't like the idea of textbooks, because that means you've got to study and you've got to take tests and the possibility of failure and all that kind of work. But a textbook really is nothing more than a way to convey information from the mind of one human being or a group of human beings through the written word to the mind of another human being, thereby increasing the knowledge of the user of the textbook. A textbook is usually assumes that the reader of the book will know very little about the subject matter. It usually starts at a very simple level. Then as the knowledge of the reader increases, the information presented becomes more difficult. You know, we're all familiar with the textbook on mathematics. And let's say that my friend Joe here knows nothing at all about mathematics. He can't add, he can't subtract, he can't do any of those things. Oh, he can count. He could probably count to 21 if he's standing there naked and got everything where it's supposed to be. He might make 21.
20 and a half, actually.
And I hand Joe a textbook on mathematics, and I say, I want you to go to chapter 5 and work the algebra problems. Well, he'll go to chapter 5, but he just sees a bunch of marks on paper. He has no idea what that means. But if I say to Joe chapter 1 deals with addition and subtraction, the value of numbers, addition and subtraction. If you'll read that chapter and study it and ask questions and let me help you, by the time you're through with chapter 1, you'll be able to add and subtract. And sure enough, he learns how to do that. And I say, now that you know how to do that, how to add and subtract, now then you can go to chapter 2 and you can learn how to multiply and divide. And he does that. And then I say, now you can go to chapter 3 and you can learn about fractions and decimals, and he does that. And we gradually prepare his mind for the algebra problems in chapter 5. I think one of the greatest mistakes I see being made in AA today, a newcomer comes in, we hand them the big book, we say go to chapter 5 and do what it says and you'll be okay. That's what they told me when I first came to AA. And the newcomer goes to chapter 5 and immediately they run into a bunch of algebra problems. They run into the 12 steps. And step 1 said, we admitted we were powerless over alcohol, our lives had become unmanageable. The newcomer said, man, I ain't powerless over nothing. They have no idea what we're talking about. Step 2 says, came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. Newcomer said, man, don't tell me I'm crazy. Sure, I do stupid things when I'm drunk, but when I'm sober, I'm like other people. They have no idea what we mean by that statement. If you're not powerless and you're not nuts, then you don't need to be thinking about turning your will and life over to the care of something you don't understand in the first place. And we present them with an impossible situation. If we can do nothing else at all this weekend, I hope we can be able to see the value of the doctor's opinion and the first 4 chapters. The doctor's opinion in the first 4 chapters, they teach us how to add and subtract. They teach us how to multiply and divide. They teach us about the fractions and decimals, and they prepare us for chapter 5, because you see chapter 5 starts with step 3. And it's hard to start with 3 unless you got 1 and 2 behind you. Standard textbook theory. Standard textbook sequence. Presenting it in a sequence, increasing our knowledge with each chapter until we're ready then for chapter 5 when we get to it.
It's amazing the writers of this book thought so much of steps 1 and 2 that they used the doctor's opinion in the first 4 chapters to explain steps 1 and 2. Very important.
The other thing that's so important here is there's just a sentiment against any radical changes being made in it. You know, this book here, the recovery section of the book, the first edition, the recovery section of the second edition, the recovery section of the third edition, and the recovery section of the fourth edition has never been changed. They're exactly the same. And I think that's the greatest miracle in Alcoholics Anonymous today. You know how we love to change things. And anybody that's ever read this book has rewritten it in their mind at least twice. But collectively, we've never found it necessary to change the recovery section of this book. I wonder why. Anybody want to venture an idea?
Does it work?
It works, doesn't it? It works just as good today as it did in 1939. Why? 3 reasons. Number 1, alcoholics have not changed. They're doing the same thing today they did in 1939. They get into jailhouses. They get into car wrecks. They get into hospitals. They get into divorce courts. They get into insane asylums. Call them treatment centers today, the insane asylum. And they get into graveyards. They're still doing the same fun things today that they did in 1939. Haven't changed a lick. Alcohol hasn't changed. It's the same today as it was in 1939. And the names have changed. The bottles have changed. The colors have changed. I saw one not long ago called Peach Fuzz. And I wondered, what in the hell is Peach Fuzz? But if it had alcohol in it, it'll make you drunk just sure as anything. Human nature never changes. It's the same today as it was thousands of years ago. And that's what this book really deals with. It deals with alcoholism, it deals with alcohol, and it deals with human nature. And therefore, it works just as good today as it did in 1939. Never found it necessary to change it at all. Let's go to the forward of the first edition for just a moment. Roman numeral 13.
And it says,
I.
And it says we. There's that great big word in Alcoholics Anonymous, we. We can do what I cannot do. We can help me stay sober, which I couldn't do. Big word. We of Alcoholics Anonymous are more than 100 men and women who have recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body, 2 different things. Later on tonight, we're going to separate the body from the mind and talk about them in great detail. To show other alcoholics precisely how we have recovered, it is the main purpose of this book. And anytime you see italic, Charlie calls it squiggly writing, but don't let him throw you. It is italic. Anytime you see italic in this book, it means it's very, very important. We ought to read it again and consider what it's trying to say to us. To show other alcoholics precisely how we have recovered is the main purpose of this book. We see words like precisely, specifically, exactly, with clear-cut directions on how to recover from alcoholism. Now, this is not a book going to tell us just about how to recover from it. It's going to tell us precisely, specifically, exactly, with clear-cut directions on how to recover. And if I do that the way they say, then I should expect to be able to recover from alcoholism. For then we hope these pages will prove so convincing that no further authentication will be necessary. We think this account of our experience will help everyone better understand the alcoholic. Many do not comprehend that the alcoholic is a very sick person. And besides, we're sure that our way of living has its advantages for all. Go ahead.
2 little ideas out of there. Number 1, we are more than 100 men and women. Most books I read have been authored by one person. And I read a book authored by one person. If I see something there I don't agree with, I say, well, who in the hell are they to think they're smarter than I am? And I just ignore it. But if I do it with a big book, I'm not going to be arguing with one person. I'm going to be arguing with 100 people. The first 40 said, Bill, we want you to write the book. You've been sober longer than anybody else. You know more about it than anybody else does. But they said, Bill, this is not to be your book, it's to be our book. And as you write those chapters, we want to see them. And we'll add to, delete from, and change around whatever we want to. When we're through with it, it'll be the collective knowledge, experience, and wisdom of all 40 of us, which turned out to be 100 by the time the book was published in 1939. So if I'm going to argue with what this book has to say today, I've got to remember I'm not arguing with one person. I'm arguing with 100 people. And these 100 people have recovered from the same thing that's killing me, a hopeless state of mind and body. That brings in the word recovered. And we hear fights all over the world. Is it recovered or recovering? Can you really recover from alcoholism? Well, I hope you can. Because if we can't, we're going to be in bad shape, aren't we? Before I came to AA, I lived in a hopeless state of mind and body. I could not keep from drinking, nor could I drink without getting drunk. And I almost destroyed me under that condition. I came to AA and I got sober and I worked this program. Now, I no longer live in that hopeless state of mind and body. I cannot safely drink alcohol, but by golly, I can stay sober. And I don't live in that hopeless state of mind. 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 Live in that hopeless state of mind.